This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It's 11:07 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. Time now for Ask a Rabbi.
Hello, everyone, and this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb for Congregation Eitz Chayim, coming to you for Ask a Rabbi, and you can give me a call at 772-340-1590 and ask any question that you might have. And so welcome to the first Ask a Rabbi of January 2020. And I'll start with a little PSA, which is, in 2020, because it's a 20, don't write just 20. We've all gotten into the habit of just writing the last two numbers of the year. You don't want to write just 20 on a check or an important document. You know, writing it on the food that I put in my fridge, not a big deal. Hopefully I don't even need to put the year because it should only be in there for days instead of months or years. But for a check or something like that, this year and this year only, somebody can add some numbers after your 20 and change the document.
Whoa.
Okay. Yeah, in many different ways, in ways you might not even expect. You know, and it might be something like a forgotten check that doesn't get cashed and you've written it off because it's beyond the extension time. And now it's 2 years from now and they come across the check and they write 2022 or something like that, or 21 or whatever. Yeah, so, you know, please pay heed this year and this year only. Next year, not a problem until long after most of us are gone. To be an issue, but this year, be a little bit mindful and write 2020, even though it doubles the effort on the year. We'd all gotten in the habit right around 2000 to write 2000 so that it didn't look like 19-something, and now we're going to have to do it again for a year. Pay attention.
Okay, Rabbi.
That's my PSA. Yeah.
Got a question for you.
Sure. Okay, what's the question?
This is current news. What happened over the weekend. And, you know, it just seems like more and more, there's just a lot of anti-Semitism growing, and a lot of college campuses too.
Yeah, there's been some on college campuses. You know, people think that anti-Semitism may have disappeared, and it never disappears. It goes a little bit underground for a while. So
I hadn't seen it to this extent, though, in years.
No, it's much more overt. People are feeling emboldened. And in some ways, the media coverage of it glorifies it. You know, it's one of the hard parts. You know, we've got to learn to not publicize bad guys. You know, we need to publicize the event, but we need to not publicize the bad guys because it's their moment of fame. You know, and it's a hard thing. We're slowly seeing that less and less perpetrators are being named, but they still get named in the story because it's news. You know, and it needs to be part of the public record, but, you know, not until the story passes on to page 3, if that makes any sense. You know, if you put it on the front page, then somebody thinks, oh, I can have my 2 minutes of glory. Yeah. You know, even if I get taken out for doing this, hey, you know, my name is part of history.
I'm famous,
right? Infamy is still fame. You know, it was the big argument when the TV stations ran a show on Jesse James that they were glorifying robbery, right? Because of who and what they were doing. And that's a hard question to deal with. You know, the media, you know, we identify with people. And if we identify with the bad guy, then we're much more likely to copycat. And that's the issue. So, you know, the more this kind of thing gets publicized, the more somebody says, hey, you know, let's go do that here. Nobody's expecting it. And so the publication of all of these things creates more and more of it. I'm going to piggyback on something that Stuart talked about, which was that, a few generations ago, kids could safely move through cities. Now, part of that was because we weren't as mobile, and so there wasn't as much anonymity as there is now. But the other thing is that bad things still happen. That's one of the reasons we have the rules and the laws that we have now. They just didn't get publicized as much. So they didn't escalate. They didn't have this media effect. I'm going to tie it into a crazy thing that you might not expect, which is signaling theory. All right. In signaling theory, the peacock has, the male peacock has this humongous tail that is not useful for anything other than showing off to a female. Okay?
Okay, where are you going with
or
this?
intimidating another male. It's the only benefit it has. It costs the male peacock extra food that he's got to eat to carry it. Flying, he's got to learn to fly. He's got to build up his muscles. He's got to do a lot of work to keep that tail intact and beautiful. And we've all seen, here and there, the bedraggled peacock that's not able to do that, and they look like garbage, right? Because they can't keep it up. That's called costly signaling, and it's viewed as being an honest signal because it's so costly. Right. So what the male peacock is saying, hey, my sperm is fantastic. You should have my sperm. You should want it because you want your babies to be strong and virile like I am. And so that's how it's useful in the breeding ritual. And again, it intimidates other males who are smaller by saying, hey, I'm bigger. They're going to pick me. Lay off. And lesser males will, because, they if they can see it, they presume the female can see it. Sex drives the world. I'm sorry. Especially when we're getting to a survival level.
Okay.
Okay, so that's called costly signaling. Now let's take a look at something like these stories. Okay, so here's somebody who's doing something and it costs them their life. Well, then it must have been really a passionate and deeply seated, and look at all the fame they're getting for it. So you can kind of see where in a perverted kind of logic, it, quote unquote, makes sense. So if somebody views their life as having no value, not worth anything, here's a way, even if it costs them their life, to achieve fame for a moment. And that's tragic. That's really tragic. And that's the playing game where in some cultures they celebrate suicide bombers, because that makes people who think their lives aren't worthwhile say, hey, here I can do something that'll make me famous. Even
You're
if
a
it's
martyr.
You're a martyr, and even if it's just for a day and blah, blah. It has nothing to do with heaven. It has everything to do with how you're viewed by your family. And you can't, alive, you're not worth anything. But dead, hey, you're famous. Do I think that's, that is suicide, right? That's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. But people who suicide don't perceive their temporary problem as temporary. And that's the rub. And that's where the intervention needs to come in, right? Is that, no, your current situation is not permanent. It will change. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's only when you can break through and do that you can interrupt the suicide action. You have to, so let's look at a crazy place to go. Arafat, when he took down Black September, because he took it down. He shut it down in 30 days. What did he do? He took these boys who didn't have anything to live for, married them off, gave them a job, a house, a car. And now they had something to live for. Their life was no longer worthless. And so, that's the key. When somebody is feeling suicidal, the key is to help them understand the value of their life alive rather than anything else. And so, you need to move forward. And that's not always easy, nor is somebody always in the right place at the right time. But that's the key to all of that. So, so let's look at the media stuff. Let's look at anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism. They're all the same thing. They're all the same animal. They're all violence against others.
Well, your situation is a lot different, simply because you've got people out there denying that the horrors of World War II never occurred.
I understand, and they know that's not true, even though they're saying
they
know
it's
it.
Pretty obvious.
It doesn't take rocket science. I mean, Hitler did try to hide it, and certainly previous sites. There's a whole book out there called "Finding the Hidden Camps" or something like that, which is they did go out of their way, not because of anything other than not wanting to be found guilty of war crimes, because they knew it was wrong. They knew what they were doing was wrong. And again, those camps, as much as my family members were in those camps, and many of them were killed there, I am the daughter of immigrants who escaped that horror. And so I'm what's called a 2G, a second generation. And, and I'm grateful that my parents did what they did to get to the U.S. My father much younger than my mother, but my mother barely got out. She got out 1 month before the doors completely closed in Vienna. So
my favorite photographer at ESPN, both of his parents were in camps.
Yeah. My uncle was
awful.
Several of my uncles. I have cousins with my name. If I look on the Nazi records, I can see my name, age 2. But they're cousins, but babies that were named for my fraternal grandmother.
Sure. Oh.
And she's still buried in Europe. She died when my father was a young boy. She died of breast cancer, probably a preventable breast cancer now, or not preventable, treatable, or maybe even preventable. I don't know. I don't know enough of the details of her breast cancer. I know that she was treated for it, and she actually came to the U.S., but it was not successful. And but she went back to Hungary. And in Hungary, Hitler was extremely efficient. He knew exactly how to do it, how to organize and orchestrate the people, and boom. So that anti-Semitism is there. And it's a form of othering. Right? Anytime that you feel superior to somebody, that you feel entitled, then you run the risk of harboring some of that stuff. And, and I think that's one of the reasons why all traditions that I know of start human beings as coming from the same place. Scripture, Jewish and Christian and Islamic scripture, all start from Adam and Eve, meaning it's all one family. We're all family. We're all human beings. We're not different from each other. Each one of us is beautiful and precious in God's eyes. So who's a human being to do something about that? Every religion teaches that. Hindus have a slightly different story, but it's basically the same kind of thing. Everybody comes from one place. Everybody starts in the same place. And even science would argue that somebody had to have that first mutation to call us humans. Or the first spaceship that landed, they started with something. It all has to start in one place at one time, hidden in the shrouds of time.
That's where a lot of atheists have a difficult time.
Well,
with describing creation.
Well, it is a difficult thing to describe, and none of us was there. Sorry, Fox News. Sorry, CNN. Sorry, MSNBC. None of you were there to get video of the beginning of life. So, we can theorize and we can conjecture, and it is that. It's theories. Do we have evidence to support one idea or another? Yeah, we have some, and we also have contradictory evidence. That's, even in science, you still deal with, what can you prove, what can you not prove? And so we hold a theory as long as there's not so much contradictory stuff that it no longer, it's got so many holes in it that it can't hold water for even a few seconds. So let's come back to this fundamental issue of ism, of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, right? Because there was a news story of a woman who pushed somebody in front of a subway train, right? Because she thought he was a Muslim. I'm sorry, there's the day we landed in Mars. Somebody went into a mosque and shot up a bunch of Sikh not a mosque, I'm sorry, into a Gurdwara rather, and shot up a bunch of Sikhs because they wear turbans.
Sure.
Right. It's not Islam, and Islam is not a justification for going in and shooting up a bunch of people either. So, my never again concept, and I have it. I'd like to see it never again. Unfortunately, we've got multiple genocides going on right now in the world. We've got multiple, and we ignore them. Boko Haram is probably the worst terrorist organization out there, and we hear nothing or almost nothing of what they do in the U.S. You've got to go to outside sources to begin to hear anything about them. Why? Because most of their victims are Muslim. Okay. So,
okay.
So there's a whole lot more going on in the world than Americans get in our news media, and I don't fault the news media for that because they're doing what sells.
Well, and being a part of especially television networks for a while, we've never been good at African or Asian situations. Yeah. Period.
Well,
it's just
most Americans don't even know that they exist.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's one of the questions you like when I bring in my students from IRSC, but one of the questions that I always ask them, when you look at a world history course that you take in high school, how much have you learned about Africa? All you really learn about them is that maybe there's some diamond mines there and that slaves came from there. You might learn that, Rommel kind of did something there, but you're not quite sure what. It's very barely mentioned. Same is actually true even with Russia and China. Right? You hear about Australia as being the penal colony.
Right.
Right. But you don't hear anything about the indigenous people that still live and have made a home in Australia forever, for a very, very long time. They share some things with Indonesian and other Asian cultures, which is interesting, because they obviously came down some land bridge or some shipping line somewhere along the line. But
they're like our Native Americans.
They're like our, yeah. I mean, people started in one place and boom, exploded into the world, and continents moved, and stuff changed, and all kinds of things happened in times that we don't know.
Well, and you talked about the whole Columbus legacy and stuff,
yeah,
and that this was, the traveling was going on, hundreds of years before
right.
Columbus.
Right. Columbus did not discover America, folks. It was well discovered by the time Columbus came. Columbus was simply looking for a shorter route to the East Indies, which is why he called the folks he met Indians, because he thought he was in India. Right. and he was hoping he was in India. He was wrong. What else is new? And
hey, he's Italian. What can you say?
We're not even going to get into half of that discussion.
Don't do that. Yeah.
And the decimation that he and his men wreaked in the quote unquote New World, horrible stories, horrible Hispaniola. Right. Those folks are right in not recognizing him as a hero. They recognize him as a villain. And, part of that's perspective. It's that 6'9" thing that I sometimes talk about. And it's a function of where you are in the scheme of things, as was brought home to me poignantly by my British neighbor the year I spent in Israel. I didn't just learn about Israel, I learned about many things. My British neighbor thought Benedict Arnold was a great guy. Right? She thought he was a hero. And I'm like,
sure.
Okay, because at one point I said something about, Benedict Arnold doing this or that. And she looked at me, she said, "What's wrong with Benedict Arnold? He's a great man." He was a great man. And I had to stop for a second and realize she's looking at this from a slightly different perspective. It's all about perspective. And so those are, the things that we learn that are unintentional are important. So let's get back to the rise in anti-Semitism. I remember a few years ago, not too long ago, saying to people, Islamophobia is going to turn and it's going to become anti-Semitism. Because people who other others, other them. And if if it becomes more difficult to act out against one group, you'll find another group. And
Wow.
Jews are easily targeted, particularly on times when they're enclosed in celebration or isolated or Shabbat, just because they're in groups and they're otherwise focused.
But you've been targeted going all the way back to biblical days.
All the way back to Joseph, yeah. Right, Pharaoh. Right, Pharaoh initially justifies aggressing and killing Hebrew kids because they might be a fifth column. That argument is as old as dirt.
Wow.
So the tendency to in and out people, and in those days that would have been based on appearance, right? Because the Ivri, the Hebrew, the Joseph's kids would have looked like Semites, and they look different from Egyptians. It's all a gene pool thing. I look at you and, you look Irish, you look Italian, you look Catholic. It's harder to say Jewish. There's a big joke about going to the synagogue in China, because there is one. There's a couple of them, and Japan, right? And the Jews there, surprisingly enough, look Oriental.
Gee, what a surprise!
Yeah, what a surprise, And so the American Jew walks in, and the Jews say, "Funny, you don't look Jewish." Right. So, in the case of Joseph, there's a group that's living in Goshen that looks different from the average everyday Egyptian. And so they're easy to isolate and say, hey, they don't look like us. Can we trust them? And that's a matter of getting to know people. Getting to know people, though, carries a danger for both sides, because there could be a mingling of ideas, there could be a mingling of identity. Identity. That thing that allows you to achieve a sense of belonging, of being part of an in-group. Even if it's a persecuted group, or if it's a violent group, or it's a whatever group, it gives you membership in it. And so, I see it sometimes that people want to wear clothing that identifies them a certain way. Right? People style their hair a certain way to look a certain style. And that really happens, this is going to be a left turn you're not going to expect, in small towns where, for example, there's only a handful of hairdressers and all the women have their hair done by this one hairdresser. They all look alike. Because even though they have different hairstyles, the one hairdresser has one way of doing those styles. And so his or her mark shows up on everyone. It makes people look more alike. And so you've got all of this dynamic going on. And anti-Semitism is an acting out of that ism. That doesn't make it right, not in any way, shape, or form. Does it mean that Jews have to consider certain safety things? Yeah, sure. But you're advised, people could unfortunately go into marathons. They could go into schools. They could go into any number of places where people are perceived as being more vulnerable for whatever reason. Usually the fact that there's a large number and that the people are focused on something else, so they won't see the attack coming. Or in the case of schools, they're more helpless. All right. And so these are bullies in the worst form. And they're taking their anger at themselves out on others.
That's an interesting thought. Yeah.
In an effort to try to elevate themselves, they're trying to squash somebody else. It doesn't work, but they haven't figured that out yet. And people are harmed along the way. Just because something is illogical or projecting out of yourself doesn't mean others are not harmed. They are all the time. Right? People are hurt much more than most people give any perception to. People tend to be very focused on what they're doing and what their goals and what their agendas are, and the rest of the world can go hang. We're taught as kids that that's not polite, that's not right, but that's the tendency, is especially kids, right? And anybody who has some problems in the prefrontal cortex not developing, which unfortunately is a large part of the population anymore. And that's not developed until you're about 25 to 30, which is why the insurance changes when you start to use the front part of your brain, because it's there, right? A teenager, Stuart was talking about driving. Yeah. People who don't have properly developed prefrontal cortexes have trouble making good judgment. That's a physical issue.
Interesting. Yeah, I never thought about that.
Yeah. And that happens. So when we're working with kids in college, they're in that place of forming the front part of their brain. And so it's really, really important that we start to teach them how to think logically and how to sound out arguments and apply them and start to recognize that, yeah, Benedict Arnold looks different if you're in Britain or in America. God looks different. Doesn't mean God is different. It's the same Benedict Arnold doing the same things that he did. But the perception of what he did and its value judgment changes by perception. Same is true with God. You've heard me say that other times. One God created one universe, created all of life.
Sure.
If we believe in a creator God. But our perception of God is what's different. Not God. God is still God. That part's not different. Okay? But how we perceive it is different. And so, perception is everything. And as they say, is your red the same red as my red? And the answer is no. Right? Because we all have the same stimulus, but how our brains process that information is different. Everybody sees it slightly differently. That's why we have, 700 flavors of ice cream. And some people like vanilla and some people like strawberry, and I like coffee chip, It's what stimulates what part of you. And so we're all a little bit different, but that doesn't mean that we're not all human. Right? Mm-hmm. King of Id notwithstanding as he jumps off his bed. We all still have this basic contribution to make to the world. We have the same 24 hours, give or take, in the average day. And, do we have the same resources? No. But even more important than our resources is our resourcefulness. Right? So are we giving of ourselves? Are we learning in order to contribute, which I think is the highest. But that's my opinion, right? That's what drives me, is this urge to contribute and to be to give a seed to somebody else that they can use to make the world better or their lives better, without hurting somebody else. If we could figure out how to improve the world without hurting somebody, then I think we're on the right track.
That's why you're such a good professor. I mean,
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love my students. I really do. You can all check me out.
It shows.
Thank you.
No, it shows.
Thank you. I'm saying that, and it's kind of funny because I just, I was on LinkedIn for just updating a couple of things on it, and I was surprised there were a couple of the people who've friended me on LinkedIn or however connected or whatever that's called on LinkedIn, and somebody there actually said something about I was in one of your world history religion courses. And it meant so much to me. And when I hear that and see that, it's like, wow.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Totally, not requested, not expected, and just a real wonderful feeling. So I do think that I'm making a difference. And obviously that's part of why I teach. No offense, IRSC, it's true of the whole university system. I'm an adjunct. I don't get paid enough for what it takes to teach. And that's the reality of adjuncts. We are not paid enough. The college gets a steal. But all universities do that. All universities take advantage of adjuncts because they know that their motivations are not purely financial. And so you actually get a better caliber professor for a lot less money. It makes business sense. I hate that fact of it, but that's I understand that that's the reality. You cannot live only on being an adjunct professor.
Right,
it's not going to supply enough.
Right.
But it's something that I do because I have a passion. I'm a rabbi because I have a passion. I had an interesting incident in a restaurant the other day. Somebody walked up to me and just started talking to me, Yeah, the world knows that I'm a rabbi. On the cruise line, people were saying, "Hi, Rabbi." I mean, as I was getting into the car to go back from the ship back to Port St. Lucie, somebody said, "Bye, Rabbi. Have a great New Year." So, I guess my persona's out there. And so this is as good a time as any to say thank you to Sally Lloyd for sponsoring Ask a Rabbi. And that's a good time to ask anybody else who'd like to. Please feel free. You can contact me or the radio station at that 772-340-1590, or you can call me at the Temple. And that's 772... here I go, forgetting my own phone number.
No.
411. Look up on Ask a Rabbi on YouTube, and it'll be on the screen.
That's right.
Thank you. I forget the interchange. It's 4110, but 941. It might be 941. That's what I'm forgetting right in the moment. Some timers coming in. So, what can I say? But you can feel free to contact me either at the Temple, which the number is easily available on Facebook or on the website, or Ask a Rabbi, any of those places. And or call the radio station. And again, thank you to Sally Lloyd for coming forward and with a wonderful donation to sponsor this episode of Ask a Rabbi. It's not hard. I would love some sponsorship, and you will get mentioned, or we can also do a commercial mention. Lots of things. All those things. If you think what I'm doing and what I'm saying is worthwhile, if you're listening to it, hopefully you think it's worthwhile, and if you'd like to contribute, any amount will help. If we need to pool some together for an episode, we'll do that. But anything will help us bring Ask a Rabbi to you, because resources are not infinite on this side either. So sponsorship makes this possible.
And if you have a business, feel free.
Yeah, absolutely. I can record a spot for you, or the station can record a spot, or you can record a spot. It's kind of fun to come in here and do a commercial. I love doing that. And or if you'd like me to do your commercial for whatever and help pay for Ask a Rabbi, we can work a deal. I've got a deal for you.
And actually, this rabbi can even do a helicopter traffic if you want.
I used to do that over the skies of Pittsburgh.
A lot of people don't know your background.
Yeah. So I'll go into that. There was a time in my life when I was the traffic watch pilot for KQV and WDVE in Pittsburgh. At that time, KQV was News Radio 14, and WDVE was their FM radio music station. So I used to do the traffic reports in the Squirrel Hill Tunnel and the Fort Pitt Tunnel and the bridges and the Triangle, and my own radio station, actually, when we had the celebration of champions, where all three teams won their championships that year.
Yeah.
And my own radio station tried to bring me down with the release of balloons, but they weren't trying to do that. But I was flying overhead and saw.
I can see that.
I'm listening to the station on my ADF, on the radio instrument in the airplane, fortunately. So I'm listening to the broadcast, and they're talking about it, and they say something about, we're releasing balloons. And I look down from the airplane, and sure enough, there's this tarp coming off and this giant mass of balloons coming up. And I'm like, oh, great. Balloons and string. Oh, those go really well with little propellers. Let me get out of here until those vacate the sky.
By the way, I have to mention this shot that I pulled onto my Facebook page. It was of the Rose Bowl with the stealth bomber. It was a shot taken from the Goodyear blimp and down straight into the bowl, and you've got the big American flag furled out, and then the stealth bomber almost on top of it. An amazing shot.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And hats off, by the way, speaking of the Rose Bowl, to the first female stealth pilot who was piloting the aircraft both during the Rose Parade and the Rose Bowl game.
There we go. See? Yeah. It's funny you mention that, because I happened to be looking back through some marathon running. There was a time when it was perceived that women didn't have the stamina right, to run a marathon, and how many times organizers physically accosted female runners because they didn't want them to disprove this theory. talk about getting invested in your persona. Like, let's not attack people who are just, out there doing something like running and improving the running world. And
well, you can go through the same thing with the IRC swim team, where the men have won 45 straight tournaments, the ladies 40, only because
they weren't around for 5 years. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So, women are athletes too. One of the things I get a kick out of in my classes, I love to leg press. I haven't done it recently, but I have leg pressed quite a bit. And I have a video of me at one of the LA Fitnesses here in town.
Uh-huh.
And I'm leg pressing, and it's like 500 pounds. And it's a video, so it's
wow.
me. Little fat me. Leg pressing. Yeah, I tell people don't get in front of my feet when I'm mad.
Ooh.
Yeah, I've got lots of strength there. Not so, I've got some upper arm strength. I can do chin-ups, or at least I used to be able to do chin-ups. I haven't done them lately. But, I enjoyed working out. I wasn't into sports, but I enjoyed working out. I love tumbling. I love field and track kind of things. And, and I like bench pressing and I like leg pressing. I don't know why those two turn me on, but they do. And
interesting.
Yeah. So, crazy things. For a long time, not now, but for a long time, I actually had a press in the house where you could do weights. And unfortunately, those become flat surfaces if you don't pay attention for a little while. And then it really becomes a pain every day to keep moving whatever it is that I or my partner or my husband have laid on the bench and keep moving it.
Yep.
So you stop using it, and then it really becomes a flat surface.
And you hang clothes on it.
Yeah, and the day we hung a piece of clothing on it was the day that it vacated the house. So, all right. And so I do have somebody calling. I have Bob on line 1. What's your question, Bob?
Good morning.
Good morning, Bob.
I'm a Catholic, and we recently took a trip to the Holy Land. And on the flight back, I sat next to a Jewish couple. And when the flight was over with and we were getting off the plane, I shook hands with the man and everything. And then I went to shake hands with the woman, and she said, "Oh, I can't touch a man." And I was just wondering what the significance of that is.
Okay, so that's a modesty rule that Orthodox Jews in general follow. And it's a modesty thing. The idea that, it was more, how can I say, it's common in some branches of Christianity for women to not commingle with men.
Okay.
Right, or a man shouldn't be touching another man's wife, kind of thing.
Okay. Well, that answers that. I figured it was something to do with the Orthodox Jewish, but I just, I'd never heard of it.
Okay. No,
Thank you, Rabbi.
And I think that you'll see the same thing true with Muslims. It's those
especially
cultures,
Muslims.
those cultures that have that separation of male and female, and consider that as part of a modesty, respect kind of an issue. And I'll counter it by saying this, though, that if covering up and all of that is modest, then showing your foot can be very sexy. Again, it's perspective.
Yeah, no.
Right? And so, it's a cultural thing. And you'll see that as more cultures mingle, some of that breaks down. But yeah, there are some issues in the cultural issues, not religious issues, but cultural issues. And they backwash into their religious traditions. For, like honor killings is not part of Islam, but it is part of some cultures where the dominant religion is Islam.
That was the first time we had taken a trip over there, and it was beautiful.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, everyone said how, are you sure you want to go over there? It's not safe. And I felt safer there than I do here in Fort Pierce.
All
right. Well, thank you, Rob.
Yeah, you're absolutely welcome, Bob. Bob just said that he felt safer in Israel than he did in some parts of the U.S. Every country's got its safe parts and its not so safe parts. So I'm glad that you had a great trip and enjoyed it, and hopefully got to see lots of holy sites. There's holy sites for all religions in Israel. It's an amazing confluence, thanks to being that land bridge between major continents. So thank you for calling, Bob. Thank you so much. And hopefully that explains why. Yeah, you'll see that there's a small community of Orthodox Jews in Stewart, and some of the women there will refrain from shaking hands with men,
Really?
or men with women, right?
Okay.
So, yeah. So if, for example, you bump into their rabbi somewhere, he won't shake hands with a woman for the same reason. Right, and so Bob encountered it because he was male, that the male partner was willing to shake and the female not, and it works the other way too. If Bob had been Roberta, then the wife would have shaken hands, and the husband
wouldn't.
Right.
Ha.
Okay. So it it's not just women that aren't allowed to shake. It's you're not supposed to shake hands with the opposite sex.
Yeah.
And so that's the rule, and that's the modesty thing. So
when you were living there in Israel,
I was not living among Orthodox.
Okay.
I lived in what was considered the modern or secular part of Jerusalem. For those who know Jerusalem, I was living on Rehov Zangvil, and up on the hill, just a little bit on the outskirts, still within bus routes to the city, and closer to the wrong campus, because a lot of my classes were on Mount Scopus, because that's where the English classes are taught. But we live close to the main campus, and sometimes I would go to the Hebrew classes. Interestingly, most of the professors at Hebrew University that teach English not all of them teach English classes, but those that teach English classes also taught the same class in Hebrew. So sometimes if I needed a little extra, I would go to the Hebrew class and listen to that.
Okay. Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. But, so, and somebody here typed in on thank you, Sharon, put on fundamental Mormons, right? Fundamentalist. Any fundamentalist group is going to tend to not want to touch opposite sex. Modesty seems to be one of the definers at fundamentalist, or those that want to be perceived as older traditions.
Like the Amish, probably.
Right, the Amish won't do it. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. If I go to have business in an Amish store, and we used to live in Ohio, right next to a very large Amish community, Hartville, Ohio, has a very, very large Amish community, and they. Again, men don't touch women, and women don't touch men. But you can do business. Business runs everything. And Bob, is this the same Bob called back?
Oh, this is another Bob.
Hi, Bob. Thank you for calling. Bob number 2 on line 3. Thank you for calling in. What's your question or comment?
I had the opposite experience of the first Bob. When I was a kid, I was in a Boy Scout troop, and my dad was our scoutmaster, and we had also not only a Boy Scout troop, but a band, and the band played at a nursing home.
Okay.
And this guy comes up to me, and actually he comes up to my dad, and he kisses my dad, and my dad takes me to his side, and as it turns out, the guy came on the boat with my grandparents from Poland, and I found out that in that part of Europe, men kiss men.
Yeah.
And in our part of the world, that's looked on as, hey, what are you, queer?
Okay, so Bob's comment was that he had a different experience, which is that when he was a scout, I'm just going to recap it and correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, that when he was a scout, and they were doing a benefit at a nursing home, that one of the older men came up and kissed his dad because it's a European custom for men to kiss men. And that's true, right? So things like kissing and touching are cultural. And thank you for that, Bob. And hopefully you became okay with being touched by somebody for whom that was the custom.
Yes, I did.
Good. And so it's not always a sexual. Kissing is not always a sexual thing. It's a greeting thing. Is it sometimes sexual? Yeah, sometimes it is. But when it's used as a form of greeting, then it is just that. It's a form of greeting.
Boy, and you see that in the Italian culture.
Yeah, you see that in Italian. You see that in Latino cultures. You see that in a lot of cultures, especially Asian European. Not so much Chinese, but Russian. Right. So if you go up, Russians will do it, and on into Europe. So we see it in a number of cultures, and the Spanish cultures do it, Latino and Spanish. And yes, I do know the difference. So thank you for that, Bob. Yeah. So kissing can be just a form of greeting, and hopefully somebody who was oriented to same-sex wouldn't be so overt as to run up and kiss somebody in public unless it was in fact their significant other. And our American tradition is to shake hands, not to kiss. And I'm a hugger, so it's but again, I need to always be mindful of whether or not the person I want to hug is open to receiving a hug. Because I had a member of my congregation point out to me, if you hug everybody, then you're bringing everybody's germs to everybody. Because it might be on your body as you hug them.
That's a stretch. That's
if you're
stretch.
concerned about it because your immune system is down, then
Yeah.
then you might want to refrain and not hug me along with everyone else. If your immune system is normal and strong, then it should not be an issue because you're going to bump into those germs in public anyway. And there's a balance of it. For whatever reason, a funny, strange thing occurred to me. My mother was overly meticulous in cleaning her young child when she had my brother. And she went to the doctor, and the doctor looked at her and said, "Do you know that he's too clean? If you keep him this clean, he'll have no immune system."
Oh, no.
He's a young boy, let him get dirty. So there's always in life a need for balance. Any time that you go off to any extreme, it tends to become an issue. And, perspective, isn't that what the Buddha taught, the middle path? Don't go off and be extreme. For some people it works to be extreme. It's helpful if you're in a community of extremists and then you can kind of feed off of each other, but hopefully not with violence. I'm thinking of the Jains right now who are extremists, but they're extreme pacifists. And so they absolutely work at doing no harm. And it affects the way they make decisions and how they live their lives. And so those are all important things. So hopefully, hey, 2020, you're young. Let's start moving in a good direction. Let's start moving in a place where we can honor and appreciate each other because we are all God's children. So thank you to both Bobs for calling. Anybody else is welcome to call. We've got 5 more minutes. It's at Ask a Rabbi on 772-340-1590. And I've got 1 more second to say thank you to Sally Lloyd and to ask if anybody else would like to sponsor an Ask a Rabbi episode or a number of episodes or a part of an episode. Go either way. We'll take any and all sponsorships, and I really do appreciate that. It helps allow me to be here to answer your questions. So if you've got a question or if you've got anything along those lines, please feel free to give me a call. And we're into the quiet period, the period after the secular New Year. And somebody just this past week asked me, what's the next holiday? It's Tu B'Shvat, and it's the New Year of the trees. All the trees turn another year older, and we'll be planting another tree. We've got little tiny baby limes on our lime tree. So I'm kind of excited about that. Key lime pie maybe in the future.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, because it's a cross between Myers lemons and key lime. Trying to make the key limes a little bit bigger so you can
really
actually use
tart?
them. I've not tasted one yet. We had one last year from one of the trees that we picked, but we've dried it instead of using it because it was a little tiny thing. We'll probably have little tiny ones this year because the trees are still kind of young. And yes, there was a biblical instruction that a tree needs to be a certain age before you use its fruit. And that's the reason for
really?
having,
I
well,
didn't
that's
know
the
that.
reason for having a New Year of the Tree, so you can tally how old a tree is, so you know when it's time that you can start using the fruit and start making the offerings from it. You don't give an offering from a baby tree, because it's a baby.
Okay.
It's a baby.
Yeah.
And you just let its fruit be. And so, yeah, we've got these little lime trees in front of the synagogue.
So when exactly is this celebration?
On the 15th of Shvat. Now, when is Shvat? I'm not sure. I can look it up. I'm not going to take the time to do that now, but I'll have that next week for you.
Okay.
But you can Google it, Tu B'Shvat 2020 or 5780, whichever way you want to look it up. It's the 15th of Shvat. I know when it is on the Hebrew calendar. I just don't know the blending of the Hebrew calendar to the Jewish calendar.
The Gregorian
To the
calendar.
Gregorian calendar, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Pope Gregory, for giving us the calendar that we currently have. And that's just one of the joys. And so I would invite people to look around. Am I concerned about anti-Semitism? I always am, because I'm Jewish. I'm also concerned when I'm outside the country of anti-American sentiments. Thank you, Iraq and Iran right now. Right? Because, again, Americans are obvious. They look different or most Americans look different from most Iranians. Not all, because some Americans are of Iranian descent. Jews have a variety of looks. You cannot tell a Jew when one of my favorite lines in the book in the movie Exodus is where the guy's looking right at the Jew and says, "Oh, can you check for the splinter in the eye?" Because the guy's busy saying, "Oh, I can spot a Jew anywhere." No, you can't. We come in all sizes, shapes, and colors.
Oh.
And but I'll also mention inside there that one of the issues, even inside Judaism, is racism. And
Inside,
yeah, because we look different. So if you've got other isms, they can bubble up.
Well, I guess
not
you
at our
are-
synagogue. Not at our synagogue. But,
You are different from the Orthodox, to say the least.
well, of course, we look different from the Orthodox. Yes, I sit here in the studio in my short sleeve T-shirt, which the Orthodox would not do. They would consider it immodest because I'm showing my elbows. So their level of modesty is a different definition than mine. And again, I ask my classes that, am I modestly dressed in front of you? And the class will always say, yeah, extremely. Is your professor dressed, right? So I'm in slacks and usually a short sleeve shirt. And I said, not by Orthodox standards. By Orthodox standards, I should be wearing a skirt so you can't differentiate my legs. And I should cover my elbows.
Wow.
Right,
Okay.
and so
I didn't know that.
Right, so that's why you see women covered up when you see a picture of Saudi women. It's worth noting, and do this. Look around and see how many pictures you see of men. They're equally covered up and in robes in the Saudi world. It's a cultural thing, and so everybody, let's learn from each other's cultures. Let's move forward. Let's do some really good things. Let's love each other a little bit. That means putting them in your heart and wanting the best for everybody. Let's get the best benefit, and I think we can make 2020 a wonderful year. Remember to add the second part of the year to it. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb, and this has been Ask a Rabbi. Please check us out at Congregation Eitz Chayim, either on Facebook or on our website. Have a great week. See you next Friday.
You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie. Talk of the Treasure Coast, webcaster to the world.